I realized this was of considerable importance, in fact, perhaps the most important issue after the fight against the enemy. And I sent messages to London to explain that whatever illusions they might still have, that there could be reconciliation. This was lost and gone forever. It was 2 years too late.
What Velebit did not tell Deacon was that under an assumed name, Vladimir Petrovich, he had travelled to meet the German High Command to discuss a ceasefire 4 months earlier. These German documents also record the partisan intention to attack the British if they ever landed in Yugoslavia. Survival was the priority for both Tito and Milhailovíc. For each, the other was the main enemy. They both wanted to control the country after the war. In the interim, whether this could be better achieved by killing Germans or talking to them depended on local conditions. British arms could be useful, but British interests were irrelevant. For the British, there was only one enemy. They clung to the illusion that by sending in more agents and more arms to each side, they could control both movements and force them to make a united contribution to the war effort. Hudson had been joined at Mihailovic's headquarters by a senior officer, Bill Bailey, but Bailey had no greater powers of persuasion. Mihailovic remained intransigent. He saw no reason to sacrifice the lives of his men for some foreign power, and he made no apologies for the inactivity in his camp. His own government in London were telling him to conserve his forces until the Allies landed. 9 further British missions were sent to Mihailovic commanders around Serbia. The adjustment they had to make to accommodate the Chetnik philosophy is described by Jasper Rutem.
I think that it was rising disillusion, but also increasing understanding of why it was that the Royalist movement was not prepared to commit national suicide or Serbian suicide. And it became apparent to me, at any rate, after not very long, that they were not going to, we were not going to have an engagement with the occupying forces, be it Bulgarian or German. They weren't going to have a battle. The most you could expect was sabotage, hopefully on a large scale, a grand scale, but no battles, and they would only actually fight, if they were either ambushed or couldn't get out. Without it, there was no question of offensive operations. The odd murder, yes, but that wasn't my business.
Yet in the summer, Mihailovic had a change of heart. Thinking that the Allied invasion of Sicily would be followed by a landing in the Balkans, he felt his moment had finally come. His target was the main east-west railway running through Serbia. A British sapper officer, Archie Jack, laid the charges. Hudson took these photographs. After 18 months of inactivity, he could hardly believe it. But the success was soured by a propaganda gaffe. It was almost too much for Hudson.
When the BBC gave the credit to the Partisans, Milhailovíc was shocked. He couldn't believe such treachery could come from the British. And not for the first time had Cairo put a British officer in a position where they could not look their allies in the face. It was just too wicked.
By autumn, I, at any rate, was beginning to feel that there was a change of emphasis in Cairo, that instead of us supporting both sides equally, which was the theory when we were sent in, we were beginning to be regarded as the bad boys or the inadequate boys, and the others, the people who were with the partisans, were getting the bulk of the supplies, which was in fact what was happening.
The partisans had an additional bonus in September 1943. When the Italians surrendered, the bulk of their weapons fell into partisan hands. The civil war was effectively won. But Britain was still backing both sides. Churchill had decided to send a personal envoy to Tito. The man he alighted on was an SAS officer with Foreign Office experience, Fitzroy MacLean.
I said, what is the purpose of my mission? And he said, well, first and foremost, it's military, to find out quite simply who is killing the most Germans and how we can help them to kill more. And I said, what about the political implications? These people are communists. And he said, they are secondary.
Some amateur film of MacLean in Yugoslavia survives. In his reports, he confirmed what Deacon had found. In his view, the partisans were the most effective resistance movement in Europe. Then in December, at Tehran, the Big Three pledged full military support to the partisans. But at that very moment, Tito was setting himself up as the supreme political authority in Yugoslavia. King Peter's future was in jeopardy. On his way back through Cairo, beset by ceremonial duties, Churchill had to face the political consequences of supporting communists. He sent for Deakin and MacLean.
I said that I had no doubt that the partisans would take power once the war was over and would set up a communist regime. At that point, Winston interrupted me and said, do you intend to make Yugoslavia your home after the war? Do you intend to live there? And I said, no. And he said, well, neither do I, and therefore had we not better leave it to the Yugoslavs to work out what kind of regime they want?
Both Fitzroy and I pointed out to him that, in our view, the only possibility of doing anything to save the position of the king, whom Churchill thought we were under a moral obligation to put back on his throne at the end of the war, would be the vague chance of getting a concession out of Tito if we abandoned Milhailovíc.
King Peter of Yugoslavia with members of his government in Cairo.
King Peter had been brought out in the hope of returning him to Yugoslavia. Paradoxically, it was now argued that the one man who had supported him throughout, Milhailovíc, should be dropped.
It was the total passivity of Milhailovíc which was the greatest argument against him. The second point was that evidence had been accumulating over previous months, that his commanders, certainly outside Serbia, and in some cases inside Serbia, had been first taking arms and supplies from the Italians, and in proved cases also from the Germans.
But the evidence did not convince the Foreign Office. They wanted conclusive proof that Milhailovíc was personally implicated in collaboration. Eventually, they fell into line. On March the 2nd, 1944, an order went out to all British officers with the Chetniks to pull out.
I felt sick when I got that message, because if you've been through a lot of months with a group of people, and you've shared their life, and you realize that they are not enjoying it either, and they were doing it for a cause in which they believed, and you kept on telling them that it was the same cause in which you believed, and then you had to tell them that they were regarded as blacklegs. It was awful, very sad, and very anger-making at the time.
Military necessity had prevailed over political expediency. Supplying the partisans became a full-blooded military operation and no longer an SOE affair. British policy had turned full circle. Milhailovíc was forgotten as the partisans, fortified by massive Allied support, reached the Red Army and Belgrade. Tito had won supreme